How many third-party applications in your environment have active OAuth access to your Salesforce right now? And what if an attacker leveraged their legitimate access for data theft? Well, that's what we're diving into on this episode of Shadow Talk.
Welcome to Shadow Talk, a cybersecurity podcast powered by ReliaQuest, the leader in agentic AI security operations. I'm Alexandra Moore, Threat Intelligence Manager.
And I'm John Dilgen, Threat Intelligence Analyst. Now, we've covered OAuth abuse and device code phishing in a recent episode, but it still continues to evolve. And our threat research team uncovered last week yet another reminder that SaaS integrations remain a largely underestimated risk.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And the campaign that our team found used Klue, which is a new legitimate integration, and essentially used the integration's own credentials to quietly siphon CRM records at scale through a door that was already open.
Yeah, and really it's the same pattern we've seen before in the sales loft drift and other compromises. The key thing is that organizations need to understand that every third party application with active OAuth access to a critical platform is part of their attack surface. This includes the credentials it carries, the service accounts behind it, and the tokens that it generates, all can be hijacked by attackers. Now, we want to be clear here since external reporting has been unclear. Now, ReliaQuest tracked and observed these Klue attacks across our customer base, but we were not directly affected ourselves. We do not use the Klue integration.
Yeah, good call out there, John. And I think what's interesting is that these Klue attacks are also reflective of a larger trend where threat actors are essentially targeting OAuth tokens and device codes. So the second thread that we're going to pull in today's episode is this broader surge in OAuth phishing and how AI-powered phishing as a service kits put sophisticated, high-volume campaigns really within the reach of any threat actor with a subscription.
Yeah, so really we have one major issue here with two converging problems within it: the trusted integrations as an unguarded entry point and an AI-fueled attack ecosystem making phishing faster and harder to catch than ever before. Let's dive into both.
All right, brilliant, John. Let's begin with the Klue/Salesforce integration story. Can you give us a bit of context and break down the details of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like we mentioned last week, our threat research team discovered how compromised Klue integrations were being used to authenticate to Salesforce via OAuth. This enabled threat actors to exfiltrate customer relationship management or CRM data. Now, if you don't know, the Klue integration is a competitive threat intelligence platform that syncs battle card and win and loss data within Salesforce.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. So, just before you take us into what our team found and what happened sort of downstream in Salesforce, can we go back a step? So, we talked about, what happened in the incident that we observed, but how did that Klue integration get compromised in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's important context to set things up here. So, Klue stated in their public releases that their compromise began on June 11th, when threat actors gained access to some of Klue's backend systems, specifically a system that manages connections to other software platforms. Now, from there, the threat actors pushed malicious code through an update that was designed to harvest OAuth tokens. And these are the tokens that Klue's customers use to connect the platform to their own environments, including to applications like Salesforce. Now, in the attacks that we observed across our customer base, the adversary first authenticated through a compromised Klue integration with Klue service accounts. They generated OAuth tokens and ran automated Python scripts. The scripts perform discovery against the Salesforce object catalog via GET and REST API queries.
Yeah, and I think that those scripts that you're mentioning were likely attempting to identify the locations of highly privileged data. We've seen this a lot in other attacks.
Yeah, we definitely have. And just to kind of layer in a reminder for our listeners there, our research in the past has shown that many of these data discovery scripts are built to identify the most critical data the fastest helping threat actors steal that data first and making sure they get the highest payment possible. So, really, the major thing here to understand about the Klue integration compromise is that a legitimate integration's own credentials were used to quietly siphon CRM records at scale through a door that was already open for its own legitimate functions.
Great, thank you. That's a really comprehensive overview there. But it's interesting hearing that because it makes me think about attribution for these latest attacks. What you're outlining there sounds a lot like the MO of Shiny Hunters, a group that we know and love and have spoken about many times on the podcast before.
Yes, it certainly does. But unfortunately, the attribution here is a little muddy, but still, let's dive into it. So, on June 19th, a relatively new group calling themselves Icarus listed Klue on their data leak site. Then, on June 22nd, they started listing several of the downstream victims from these attacks, including some big name organizations. Now, the listings gave us a sense of what was likely taken in these data captures. This included Salesforce records like business contact information, subscription details, sales communications, and opportunity notes. That CRM data is highly valuable for targeted follow on attacks and social engineering.
Yeah, and just to jump in there and sort of put that into perspective for our listeners, when we talk about CRM data being valuable for follow-on attacks, we're not just talking about contact lists here. We're talking about what you just mentioned, the opportunity notes, the pricing details, the sales communications. This is the kind of intelligence that makes a spear phishing email almost indistinguishable from a legitimate one. So it's really valuable data there if it's deployed in the right ways.
Yeah, it really is. And, kind of put some context behind that, right? A threat actor can use that information in their phishing emails, in their calls to help establish credibility with the target to help them ensure that they will click those phishing links and enter in their tokens.
Mm.
So, what's also interesting and where the attribution starts to get a little messy here, like you mentioned, Alex, the TTPs are very consistent with what we've seen previously from Shiny Hunters across their attacks in 2025 and 2026. We've repeatedly seen the group abusing OAuth access to connected applications for bulk extraction of Salesforce data and extortion, which really maps well to what we're seeing here with this Klue integration compromise. Now, on top of that, there's also a claim of responsibility from a Shiny Hunters linked Telegram channel that came on June 21st, stating that the Salesforce instances belonging to several of Klue's partners had been exfiltrated. However, we'd flagged that Telegram message with low confidence, as Telegram claims from threat actor channels are notoriously unreliable and difficult to independently verify. Another piece of this that I'd highlight here that's worth noting is that the organizations were named on Icarus's leak site, not Shiny Hunters. And I think that's an unusual detail that's worth understanding because it may indicate that Icarus is operating independently here rather than this campaign being linked to Shiny Hunters also.
All right, so it's quite a complicated picture that you've outlined there with lots of different permutations and lots of different possibilities. But I guess the takeaway is that although the TTP overlap in these incidents is compelling, the attribution picture here is still developing, and hopefully something will come out in the days and weeks to come. But right now we're still not really sure what's gone on in terms of the threat actor responsible.
Yeah, exactly. But also at the end of the day, that attribution is the less important part of things. What we can say with confidence here is the pattern of attacks, the abuse of the trusted third party integration with OAuth token theft, leading to Salesforce exfiltration at scale and extortion from there. Now, as we've seen in the Klue attacks, there's really also a larger trend here of threat actors targeting OAuth tokens and device codes. Now, we've also recently seen a large volume of OAuth phishing. And it's really important to understand that many of the AI based phishing as a service toolkits that are offered to threat actors on criminal forums, things like Kali365, have OAuth phishing functionality built directly into them. Make it very easy for attackers to create phishing web pages for these campaigns at scale.
Yeah, and I guess just to expand a little bit on those phishing kits, with these types of phishing kits, essentially the threat actors just have to enter the URL of any brand that they want to impersonate, and then AI just quickly builds them an imitation phishing page that can steal these OAuth tokens essentially in real time.
Yeah, and it really just makes it very trivial and easy for attackers to implement that and get things spun up. Now, last week we identified a large volume of OAuth device code phishing across our customer base that we assessed was likely driven by Kali365. Now, for those less familiar with device code phishing, it's a tactic where attackers trick users into entering a device authorization code on a legitimate looking web page, which really hands the attacker a valid OAuth token without ever needing the user's password or MFA. Now, the campaign we observed primarily targeted organizations in the manufacturing sector, but really was across all sectors, including education, finance, and insurance, and aerospace as well. But the key component of the incidents we saw across our customer base had connections from IP addresses hosted on the 10-set ASN, specifically AS132203, right after the device's codes were stolen. And then the threat actors then transitioned to IP addresses hosted on proxy providers for the rest of the attack chain for more anonymity. All right, so that was quite a lot we've just covered in the threats here as far as the campaigns and the primary threats. But Alex, can you break down what are some of the major challenges here to organizations from those?
Yeah, of course. So the number one challenge that I think we need to think about is that integrations do serve as entry points for attacks. We've seen this in quite a few attacks now, such as sales loft drift that you mentioned earlier and others. But this recent Klue abuse really just drives this home. It's another reminder that integrations for applications that hold sensitive data can be a front door for attackers. And specifically in the Klue campaigns, we had the shared credentials, the tokens, and the service accounts that were all abused to allow the threat actors access to Salesforce. And I do really want to stress here the use of service accounts by threat actors. We've called out before in previous episodes how these accounts are often overprivileged and under-monitored, and that really makes them ideal for attackers to exploit. And in this campaign, the service accounts not only provided access, but they also helped to mask the attackers' discovery and data access attempts and really just made them look like standard operations.
Yeah, and I'm going to double down on that point. Just something I saw the service account abuse firsthand in my incident response experience. And all that is really to just say that service account monitoring and hygiene should be a top priority for organizations.
Yeah, exactly. You've got firsthand experience of how important this is. So something that we really want listeners to take away from this episode here. The next major challenge for defenders to talk about is around how defenders process intelligence when attacks like this happen. And the reality for a lot of security teams is that intelligence processing is often really slow and really siloed, and it ends up in the intel essentially not being actioned properly. For example, both the service account abuse and the SaaS integration targeting are playbooks that we've seen and we've spoken about before, but there's obviously a sort of gap in terms of those pieces of intel being operationalized and actually turning into real life defenses. So we may have a security team that's read that attack analysis report. They've blocked the IOCs, but does that mean that they're fully protected, right? Have they got detections, hunts, and blocks all in place? And if a team is fully protected, it's probably quite a slow manual effort to get to that stage of protection. And they probably only have visibility into what the report gives and not what other organizations are seeing around similar threats.
Yeah, and just to kind of layer in here and maybe piece this together at a high level, Alex, what you're saying here is that the advanced organizations need the ability to quickly operationalize intelligence that is shared, not just in reports, but across organizations as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's the issue of operationalizing those pieces of intel in the first place and actually translating them into reality in your security program. But then it's also you want to benefit from the shared experience of what other organizations are experiencing so that you've got intelligence from a wide range of sources. And then the final defensive challenge that we want to call out is how the availability of these AI-enabled phishing as a service kits is really allowing threat actors to scale massive campaigns much faster than manual review and response can keep up. This is a familiar story here. You know, we keep talking about how manual responses just can't keep up with what threat actors are doing. And this is another example. And in our own AI threat report, which just released yesterday on our blog, actually, that picture becomes even clearer. So we're seeing attackers that can now launch or adjust or redeploy campaigns in a matter of hours, not in a matter of days. And really importantly, AI is eroding a lot of the traditional signals that email security tools and end users both rely on to catch phishing. You know, you used to think about things like typos and awkward phrasing and really low quality branding, and that would scream phishing email a mile off. But now those tells are gone. You know, you've got really polished, really convincing lures that are clearing secure email gateways, and they're landing directly in user inboxes, and they're landing sort of more directly than ever before. And that reality is really driving an inbox flood. So it's not just that there are more phishing emails, it's that more of them are getting through these upstream controls because they look so legitimate, because they've got that AI polish. And this just makes many teams really overwhelmed by the resulting volume in their phishing inboxes. And it means that they just don't have the time or the people power to be proactive, right? They can't be proactively hardening their defenses because they're stuck responding or reacting to phishing emails. And this is just leaving them in this reactive autopilot mode while the campaigns just keep evolving, alongside.
Yeah, it really does. All right, so we laid out how the threat actors are walking through trusted integrations, why siloed intelligence leave defenders a step behind, and how AI is scaling phishing faster than most teams can manage. Now, after the break, the steps that your team can implement today to get ahead of the threat.
Shadow Talk is brought to you by ReliaQuest, the global leader in AI cybersecurity. ReliaQuest helps enterprise cybersecurity teams contain threats in minutes with its agentic AI security operations platform, Gray Matter. ReliaQuest makes security possible for the most trusted enterprise brands in the world. Learn more at ReliaQuest.com.
All right, welcome back. Now let's dive into how organizations should strengthen their defenses against the threats that we've discussed in this episode. So, John, let's start with you. Can you explain how organizations should defend against this whole Klue Salesforce integration campaign?
Yeah, certainly. So the first thing you need to do is reset and reissue everything tied to the Klue and Salesforce integration. This includes service account passwords, refresh tokens, client secrets, and active OAuth grants. It's really important that you ensure that you revoke the refresh token here, not just the passwords. All right, because that refresh token is what helps the threat actors keep persistent access. Next, you can hunt for unusual REST API query volume, repeated pagination through larger result sets, and access from unfamiliar IP addresses. Now, in the activity that ReliaQuest observed, the user agent python-url lib was a key IOC in our threat hunting. Finally, organizations should lock down API access to known infrastructure only. This can be done through IP allow listing on third-party integration accounts and connected applications. And these same restrictions can be extended to SIM and SOAR APIs so that requests from outside approved sources can fire alerts and be blocked.
Yeah, and just to layer on there what you said, Salesforce integrations should be obviously the immediate focus given the threat that we've discussed today, but that allow listing should eventually apply to any integration accounts or any APIs that are connected to your applications that hold any of your sensitive data.
Yeah, exactly. So the Salesforce integrations are that short-term step, but the long-term posture step should be that organizations are starting to look more towards those other integrations. As we mentioned, they are becoming the front door. So we also mentioned that defenders are often slow to act on intelligence and have limited intelligence visibility. Alex, can you explain how they can improve here?
Yeah, of course. So first, I think you need to expand your intelligence sharing and intelligence collection and expand it to include more reliable sources and more organizations. So you can think of things like sector-specific ISACs or intelligence papers or different news sources. These are all great ways to increase your intelligence collection. but of course they can still be limited. So for example, many campaigns appear across sectors and change in real time after the reporting has been published. These things continue to develop. And these methods make it really difficult to act on the intel, because it still needs to be categorized and operationalized into defenses. So even if you've got all those reports coming in, sort of operationalizing it, is a whole other story. And that's where agentic AI can really come in and can help take a lot of the workload off of your team. So you should set up a workflow to collect IOCs and TTPs out of reports and out of feeds, and then be able to build detections and hunts and provide quick defense recommendations from them, so that intel isn't just, numbers on a page or sitting in a folder somewhere and never seen. It's actually being incorporated into your security programs.
Yeah, it's a great call out and use case for AI here. But I also think that advanced security tools will help provide a herd immunity of defensive intelligence here, and collecting and operationalizing IOCs and TTPs on your team's behalf. For example, ReliaQuest customers get that value from our teams researching these campaigns, like what we've covered in this episode, including Klue and Kali365, that we operationalize what we collect on their behalf within gray matter.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great call out. And so moving into the final recommendation here, for those organizations that find themselves just drowning in volume from their phishing inboxes, what can they do?
Yeah, so the simple answer here is to fight AI with AI. We know that threat actors have AI directly built into these phishing as a service toolkits. And these toolkits not only allow for phishing infrastructure to be spun up quickly and at a large scale, but they have the functionality included for the most dangerous threats, such as this OAuth device code capture that we've been talking about. They even get around certain security controls, such as the time to live security measures on these codes, by having the phishing page generate a code right when the user accesses a malicious link.
Yeah, and just to come in there and call something out, I think there's a really important shift that's happening, and it's behind what you've just said, because for a long time, the level of capability required to sort of code and implement the capabilities that you just described required real technical skill. And now we're seeing the barrier to entry is just really gone, because you don't need that technical skill anymore. And this is essentially, I think, why we're seeing a large part of campaign volume surge in the way that they are.
Yeah, it definitely is. And then on top of that, the tools are helping the threat actors make better emails that are less likely to be caught by security tools and end users, really increasing the likelihood of successful phishing. As we mentioned, those common red flags that users and tools are trained to look for in the phishing emails and web pages are becoming less and less with AI, the things like the typos and the poorly generated images. So defenders need an AI tool that can quickly analyze difficult to detect emails, find the true positives, and autonomously delete them, block the sender and the phishing attachments or URLs, all without a human in the loop. And this is really critical to free up your team's time so they can focus on the real work that needs to be done before the next attack hits.
Exactly. And let's start to close it out now. We're coming to the end of the episode. So let's end by thinking about what you can actually do with everything that we just covered. So I'll start on the leadership side as usual. And then John, you can take the practitioner piece. So for the CISOs and security leaders listening, the central point today is really just another harsh reminder that your attack surface is constantly expanding. Every third-party SaaS integration that carries OAuth access to a platform that you use that holds critical data is really just becoming part of your perimeter now. Klue is just one example. Salesforce Drift that we've mentioned a couple of times is another. And in each of these cases, that trusted connection became the front door for attackers to walk in through. And then the second leadership point is all about intelligence, scale, and speed. So the campaigns that we described today, the Kali365 powered device code phishing across different sectors like manufacturing, education, and aerospace, those just aren't waiting for you to get your quarterly threat briefing cycle. They're happening now. They're developing in hours. And the organizations that stay ahead of these campaigns are the ones who are operationalizing shared intelligence in real time, not the ones who are being reactive, right, and blocking IOCs 2 weeks after a campaign has peaked. So the tomorrow morning action here is going to be a question for your security teams, which is what SaaS applications in our environment hold critical data and which third-party integrations have OAuth access to them. And you really want to map out that list. And if the answer there is, oh, I don't know, I'd have to check, that makes it really a priority to get that inventory done, because the integration that you haven't reviewed is most likely going to be part of the next attacker's attack chain.
Yeah, it definitely will be. Now, on the practitioner side, a few important things to call out. So, first, if you have a Klue and Salesforce integration, you need to reset and reissue everything tied to it, those service account passwords, refresh tokens, and the active OAuth grants. And remember, don't stop at just the password reset. Make sure you revoke that refresh token. Then pull your Salesforce API logs, and you can hunt for the unusual REST API queries and specifically that Python-URL lib user agent. Now, second, pull your service account inventory. The Klue compromise worked largely in part because the service accounts tied to them were overprivileged and under-monitored. And this is not a Klue specific problem. It's really a larger posture problem that exists across many environments right now. Every service account with OAuth access to a SaaS platform needs to be scoped to least privilege and covered by layered detections and defenses. If either of those conditions is not met for any account on that list, then you have a gap. So, in line with that, your tomorrow morning action is to open your identity and access management tooling and pull every active service account with OAuth access to any application that holds sensitive data. For each one, ask 2 questions. Are we enforcing least privilege to the best of our ability? And are there alerts watching for unusual API activity from this account? If the answer is no to either of them, then you have your starting point. So in closing, every SaaS integration you've approved could be a key handed to someone else. The real question is whether you know if that key gets copied. Well, that's all for this week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Shadow Talk. If you want to read more about the Klue attacks or our AI threat research report, links to both are available in the link tree below. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we're just an email away. You can send your questions to shadowtalk@reliaquest.com. And please don't forget to subscribe so you can get next week's episode right to your podcast platform of choice. And finally, we really appreciate it if you can rate and review Shadow Talk wherever you listen. It will really help make a huge difference and help us to reach new listeners. We'll be back next week with another episode of Shadow Talk.